All right, so we're ready to look at the class Aves, which is the birds. I have two pictures here to illustrate diversity. So from really some of the smallest birds, which the hummingbirds are pretty tiny, to the largest birds, which are the ostriches, spans a big diversity of different kinds of birds. They all have wings, but the ostrich is considered a flightless bird, and we'll look at a picture of the kiwi in a minute, and that is also considered a flightless bird. But they all have wings. They all have the keratinized skin. We have keratinized skin. It waterproofs our skin, but they have feathers where we have hair. And they have a four-chambered heart, which is going to be the most efficient heart. Keep in mind, the birds that are flying, they're getting themselves up off the ground against gravity, and that requires a lot of energy, and so they need a pretty efficient heart for both pumping blood to receive oxygen, but also to receive glucose and nutrients to those muscles. So in this class, there's internal fertilization. The females lay eggs, but these eggs are hard-shelled, not leathery like the reptiles. They're also amniotic. We talked about having the amnion membrane and other membranes on the inside of the egg that are protective and provide nutrition for that embryo as it grows inside the egg. And then another change here from the reptiles is that birds are endothermic, meaning that they maintain their temperature internally. They have to make enough energy to create heat to maintain a particular temperature. And that also takes quite a bit of energy. And if you think about where these birds live, some live in the tropics, some live way up in the Arctic, but a bird like this snowy owl is going to have to work a little bit harder to keep its body maintained at a particular temperature. An adaptation that we see in birds, because many of them fly, they have bones, they have a bony skeleton, but the bones are more hollow than other organisms that have the endoskeleton of bone, because it takes a lot of energy to get them off the ground, and if they can lower the weight of the bones, it's a little bit easier. So I did want you to look at this figure of the skeleton of the wing of a bird, and you see that it has similar structure to ours. So here's the humerus, which we have in our upper arm, and then our forearm we have the radius and the ulna. But this end part here, the phalanges, we have fingers. These are a little bit longer in the bird than our finger bones are, but they have very similar structure to the bones in humans or mammals or primates or whatever. So this is a picture from one of your books, and it's just to illustrate both the skeleton, but also you can see here they did a cross section through the skull, and so you can see that there's big open spaces within the skull bone, and that's to make the skull weigh less, which helps them get off the ground. But if we look at the skeleton, they have vertebrae just like we do. They have the same bones in the arm. The sternum, which we have, that's our breastbone. Theirs is larger than ours because they've got to attach all of their wing muscles to that bone so that they can fly. So they have a very similar skeleton to ours, but there are certain parts that are adapted specifically for the way that the bird lives. Okay, and then this is kind of a nice picture of a feather. You probably have them falling off of birds in your backyard. We're always getting blue jay feathers and mockingbird feathers in our yard. But the quill would fit right into the skin, that keratinized skin, which is similar to our skin. So examples. So we talked about that all birds have feathers and all birds have wings. This is the other example of a flightless bird, the kiwi, which is native to New Zealand. And then we are going to have you look at the penguins when you go to the zoo, and they have wings, but they use their wings for swimming underwater. So it looks like they're flying, but they're in water instead of in air. And then the bird of paradise, there's several at the zoo. I don't think I have a question about them, but they are birds that have a lot of color and a lot of behavioral courtship dances and all of that kind of stuff. They're very kind of fancy looking birds. Okay, so our last class, and this is going to be the highest level in terms of complexity, and that would be the mammals, class Mammalia. So the name comes from the fact that they have mammary glands. So I showed a picture of a gorilla instead of a human for the mammary glands, but they have hair on their skin rather than feathers. So those two things are unique to the mammals. They're endothermic, just like the birds. They have a 4-chambered heart, just like the birds. So they have a very efficient respiratory and circulatory system, and we're mammals, we maintain our body temperature. We're not dependent on the environment for maintaining our body temperature. So just a couple of pictures of maybe things you might not think about as mammals or thinking about mammary glands. I know the state fair is not opening this year, but I used to take my kids to the state fair all the time when they were little, and one of their favorite things was to go to the barn where you got to milk the goats. But remember, if you're milking goats or milking cows, that's a mammary gland, right? And we have the same thing in the dolphins because they're mammals too. They have hair on their skin and they have mammary glands. So a couple of other examples that you might not always think about. This is not because I want you to memorize this, but because I want you to kind of think about where we started and where we are. Okay, so we started looking at animals way back here, okay, and our lowest group, our least complicated group of animals was the sponges. They had no symmetry, no tissues, very simple organisms. But then we looked at organisms a little higher than are the cnidarians, so they showed radial symmetry like jellyfish. And then as we get to these groups, and remember these are all invertebrates, all of these organisms are bilaterally symmetrical, okay? And so we looked at the difference between the flatworms and the segmented worms and the roundworms. We looked at mollusks. And then when we get up here to the top, what puts these two groups of animals at the top is that they're both deuterostomes, meaning that the second opening in the embryo becomes the mouth, okay? And so if we take this chordate class and kind of blow it up and look at everything in the chordate class, the lowest organisms down here are the tunicates and the lancelets, okay? Very simple chordates. They don't have a vertebral column, and so they're considered invertebrate chordates. And then we look at the hagfishes and the lampreys, which don't have jaws, and they have a cartilaginous skeleton. And then when we get to the sharks, they have jaws, and then we look at the bony fish with a bony skeleton. And so now we're way up here at the mammals. So this is the highest level in terms of complexity of kingdom Animalia. So within the mammal class, we're going to look at orders. That's getting a little bit more specific, but I think some of these terms should be familiar to you. I feel like you've probably heard of marsupials, maybe not monotremes, and then we are placental. So we'll talk about that a little bit, and of course we'll talk about the placenta in regards to reproduction when we look at the human reproductive system. So 3 different groups of mammals, which means that they have to have hair and they have to have mammary glands, okay? So the duck-billed platypus is a really weird one in this group. It has hair, it has mammary glands, so it's in this group, but it's interesting because it lays an egg, okay? Which means that the embryo is developing outside the body of the female. So that's kind of interesting. And then it also has a bill, which makes it look a little bit like a duck. So that's one example of the monotreme. The other one is the echidna, or the spiny anteater. They're pretty tiny. They lay eggs. And so you get perspective on this photo right here. This is somebody's thumb. Okay, so that tells you about the size of the egg and the baby echidna when it comes out of the egg. Okay, so know a couple of examples of monotremes, and what makes them different is that they lay eggs. They don't have the embryo developing within the female body. Okay, so a couple of pictures from the books of the duckbill platypus at the top and the echidna at the bottom. And then we have the marsupial group. So these do not lay eggs, but the babies are born very, very immature, much less developed than humans, okay? So this is what a baby marsupial looks like. It still looks like an embryo. So the babies are born almost as embryos, and then they basically attach to a teat within the pouch of the mom, and they grow and develop within the pouch of the mom. Okay, so opossums, which we have in Texas, are marsupials. Koala bears, which you see in Australia, and also kangaroos are marsupials. And we have you look at the kangaroos at the zoo. Notice this one, baby kangaroos are called joeys. So he's developed. He's big enough that he can get out and jump around and get his own food, but he's pretty used to living inside that pouch with his mom, so he's going to take advantage of it as long as he can, but at some point he's not going to fit in there anymore. So I don't know if you've seen opossums. We have possums that come to our back porch because we have cats that live on our back porch, so they eat the cat food. But they do have the pouch, but when the babies get a little bit big, they're still kind of dependent on mom, and so she just carries them around on her back, and I don't know if you've seen that happening in nature. And then this is a nice picture of the mama kangaroo with the baby Joey, who's decided he's going to stick with mom for a little bit longer. So the last group of the mammals are the placental mammals. So it's named after the fact that we have a placenta. So basically, the placenta is the connection between mom and baby while the baby is developing within the uterus of the female. Okay, so it's a connection between the two, and that's what helps to pass nutrients and gases and so forth across the blood from the mom to the baby. Okay, so these animals, then the baby's developing within the uterus of the female, and so when the babies are born, they're developed. They're not like the marsupials. So their heart is ready to go, their lungs are ready to go, their kidneys are ready, their liver is ready, all of those things are ready to go. They're still babies, they have a lot of growth and development, but all of their systems are developed and ready to go. So examples, we looked at dolphins in one picture, but these killer whales are in that same category. We have you look at meerkats at the zoo, different kinds of monkeys or primates, which is what we are, polar bears, all of those are good examples of placental mammals. Okay, so a few other pictures. So you're going to go by the giraffes at the zoo. If you want to feed them, you can buy lettuce and feed them. You're going to walk by the lions. These are wild dogs. We're going to ask you about hyenas, which are similar. There's no dolphins at the zoo. Sorry about that. But these are also more examples of organisms that you would hopefully recognize as placental mammals.